Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Greg. My name is Igor. I was born in Ukraine. We moved to Canada with my family when I was 12 years old. So I grew up mostly in Canada. I went to university there. I did a bachelor's in history and politics. I did my master's in public administration. I then decided that I wanted to leave Canada and explore the world. So I spent some time in New York working at the UN. I spent some time in Albania working there on a development project. Then I moved to Germany. And eventually, also spent time in India. And about 10 years ago, I realized that what I was really passionate about was psychology. And so I decided to pursue a PhD in psychology in London. Was able to get into university there, University of London, Birkbeck College, did my PhD. And while doing the PhD, also started a company called Datasign, which we did all sorts of things. We started as a fintech. Eventually, we became more of a martech company. Did that for 7 years. Sold the company to Shutterstock in 2021. And for the last 4 years, I guess, 3.5 years, became a digital nomad. Traveled the world. Currently in Thailand, of all places. And worked for a couple other places that we can talk about if you want. Did a stint as a head of product at another startup. And now I am just about finished writing a book on startups and started a new company. Although at the moment we're still early, so it's a bit unclear which way it's going to go. We already had our first pivot. It seems like 2 weeks ago, so things are a bit shaky there. But I guess we'd call a serial entrepreneur with a PhD in psychology and computer science, and just a digital nomad. That's me.
Fair enough. Great introduction. And would you say that you're using the PhD in psychology in the way that you expected then? Because I mean, you said you really wanted to study it. You went and you studied it, and then you founded a startup. So what happened there? what was the inflection point to make you go from psychology to, you know what, I want to start a startup?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it was a very interesting period of my life. As I was leaving Germany, I had an inkling, and before this, I never even thought about having my own company or working. It was or building something. It was always, a job is how you make money, and so that's what you got to do, and that's kind of what I always did. I thought I wanted to be a diplomat, but as I was leaving Germany, I had these thoughts that maybe I want to do something myself. And I had zero kind of experience doing it. And so when I moved to London to do the PhD, I loved it. I mean, the research that I started to do, my supervisor was very supportive. They were amazing, and I hadn't studied psychology beforehand, so I kind of had to get up to speed very quickly. So I was really enjoying that aspect, but at the same time, I thought, maybe I can also do something. And I started telling pretty much everybody I was meeting, and I was meeting a lot of new people because I had just moved to London, that I wanted to start a business. And so, a lot of, as soon as you start telling people you want to start a business, there were a lot of people who also wanted, I was finding lots of people who wanted to start businesses. So I would come up, I'd say, hi, my name is Igor, I want to start a business. And they would say, oh, well, great, I also want to start a business. And the idea is that, and I didn't really care what it was going to do, as weird as that might sound. I just wanted to start a business. And I would come up to somebody and they would say, well, I want to run a bar in the Caribbean. And I would say, great, let's do that. And then, we talk about it some more, and it wouldn't go anywhere. And then somebody else was actually saying, hey, I want to sell Nigerian oil. My uncle works for a Nigerian oil company. Let's sell oil. And I would say, let's do that. And then, nothing would happen. Somebody wanted to start an education company, and then that didn't happen. And so finally, my PhD supervisor actually introduced me to another student who had just quit Deutsche Bank at the time. And she said, you two should talk. And we talked, and we decided to do something. And that's how the company started. We just thought, well, and at the time, this is 2014, 2015. At the time, kind of AI and everything, machine learning, let's call it even. It wasn't even AI back then, it was machine learning. And that was sort of an emerging field. But it all emerged from psychological research. And, even, the way the whole, when you're talking about like neural networks and language models, a lot of that is actually psychologists and computer scientists trying to model the human brain. And so a lot of nomenclature in AI is psychology. And so it just happened that while I was taking courses in psychology, they were actually learning it. They were actually teaching us basic AI, like how actual neural networks work, how to model them. And so we thought, well, if we're already learning machine learning, then maybe we can apply that. And since my co-founder was coming from banking, maybe we can apply it to banking, and maybe there's a company to be made there. And then that's how it all started. So it had its roots in my PhD. Eventually, the two things kind of started to diverge. But I continued on with my PhD, kind of doing both things full time, so to speak, or at least doing PhD full time and then startup on the side for a lot of it.
So you were basically very open to everything at that period of time, by the sounds of it, just saying yes, just to.
Yeah,
must have been quite exciting.
I just
you never know what the next thing might be.
I had no idea. I just moved, and I didn't really have a direction to my life at the time. I was broke. My PhD was unfunded, so I had less than a year of savings to make it all work. So it was a very it was a very strange time in my life. Where I was open to anything, and I was happy to be doing anything and to see where things might lead to, and that's how the company was created.
This is the thing. I mean, I'm going to be 40 this year, and I've had conversations with so many of my friends and colleagues and founders and stuff like that, and investors and things about now when we look back, and it's just like that was the in our 20s or whatever, that was the time where we could just do whatever. We didn't really appreciate it. It sounds like you were appreciating it, that like actually you have way more freedom than you realized. Well, I don't know if you were particularly consciously aware of the freedom that you had, but like, that's the message I think we should be sending young, ambitious people. It's like, yeah, do it. Like, now is the time to do it, when you don't have those financial or as many financial burdens and responsibilities and family and spouses and whatever else. It's like, just be open to the universe, just say yes to stuff and try stuff, take bigger risks, because it's just going to get harder.
I think the whole risks thing is fascinating, because I didn't view moving to London and doing some PhD in a subject that I didn't know anything about and starting a company as risks. And I think that actually helped me immensely, because if I saw these things as very risky, as something that might go wrong, and then what, then I'm not sure I would have done it. And I've met so many people, even while I was doing it, they were saying, wow, you're so brave for doing it. I never felt that. I didn't feel like I was taking risks with my life. I just felt like I was living life. I was just doing things that were happening, and that was it. And I've said this phrase to so many people. To me, the biggest risk in life is actually doing something you don't love and hoping that it's going to change, because that's a risk that it might not, and a lot of the time it doesn't, and then you're stuck doing the thing you don't love. So finding the thing that you love I'm not sure that that's been risk. I mean, that's just you living your life to the fullest. Of course, there's lots of things that could go wrong in that. But again, then you're gaining experience. You're just living life, and I'm not sure that that's risk.
Well, yeah, of course, but that's the thing. It's the perception of risk given specific individual circumstance. Because of like at this age, I would look at it and say that would be risky. But that's because of right now I have those responsibilities and so on. So to do that same action now would be considered risky. But whereas in my 20s, there aren't any real risks associated. If it doesn't go well, it just doesn't go right. It doesn't go well. There's not really an enormous risk. You know what I mean? So I guess it's all about circumstance and perception. At that time, it's just living life, like you say. But yeah.
But if you think about it, the way I've always thought about it is slightly different. I've always felt like there's a right way to live life. In other words, each person kind of has a path. Where that path comes from, I don't know, but it's written. It's there, and you can use your heart to kind of guide you on the way. And you feel a lot of the time. You feel when you've screwed up, when you should have done something you didn't. You should have asked the girl out, you didn't. You should have went for the opportunity, you didn't. And you inside, you feel like, man, like I should have done that. If you think about it objectively, there is nothing that says that you really should have done that, right? There's nothing, no one is going to tell you you should have done that. It's you feeling that. And so to me at the time and even today, it's not risk. It's just you feeling like you got to be doing these things. And if you're 40, 50, even 60, you're in an unhappy relationship or you hate your work, only you can tell yourself, whether or not you're in that situation. But if you are, then leaving that, it's not risk. It's just trying to live that life that you were meant to live. And so that's how I always felt back then and now, that I'm not really risking anything. I'm more of just pursuing what I'm meant to do as I feel it.
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
And that helps because it removes that idea that you're risking something, and kind of embraces the idea that actually there's, the only risk that you're taking is just doing the thing that you're meant to do anyway. So that's how I always thought about it.
So would you say you believe in fatalism? Like you're a fatalist? You believe that things are sort of predetermined?
I've always felt that things are written, but then it's up to you whether or not you take the path. And so it's not
okay. So there is still choice. There is still free will.
That's where the free will comes in. It's kind of like
right.
The road is there. Whether or not you take it is entirely up to you.
Interesting. Okay. That's an interesting philosophy. We'll have to dive into that a bit deeper in a minute. But before that, I want to ask about the business itself. So you meet your future co-founder from the introduction that you mentioned. Is it the business is called Datasign? Is that Datasign? Is that right? Am I saying
Datasign? Yeah, sorry. Datasign. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Datasign. So you're looking at AI. Oh, my massive. Hit my microphone. So you're looking at banking and the early sort of incarnation of machine learning or AI. So what was it that the company was essentially setting out to do, at least in the beginning?
Yeah. So the idea was to combine three things. To combine psychology, since I was doing a PhD in psychology, with big data, as it was called back then, and banking. So the hypothesis or the theory was that banks had a lot of data, and back then, everybody believed that data was new oil, and that you really need a lot of data, and that's where your money is going to come from. But banks were not particularly using this data for anything. And when we talk about data, I mean, we were thinking of using transactional data, right? So how a client spends their money, where do they go, where do they shop, and so on. And we wanted to use psychology to better understand the customer, and then tailor product, services, and communication to that customer. And so the earliest idea was, and this is very kind of high level, was, okay, this person spends a lot of money on books. So psychology tells us that people who spend money on books are maybe more introverted than the average. And we know that introverted people like blue colors, longer words, and a certain tone of voice. And so we're going to tailor the letter or the phone call or the email from the bank to reflect the psychology of the person. And we were doing this way before Cambridge Analytica came along, and way before kind of that whole thing started. The idea was basically to try to tailor communication for banks. So that's how it started. And we did that for several years. And then slowly, each of the pillars started to fall apart, fall away. I think the first one to fall was banking. We realized working with large financial institutions is very difficult. And we had kind of customers in France and UK and Russia and US. We're working with different banks in different countries, Austria. But yeah, so one thing we realized, the sales cycle was way too long. And actually, it wasn't just financial services companies that had data that we could use. Telecom providers, e-commerce. So there were loads of other companies and industries that were faster moving, including the digital platforms like Facebook and others. That had a lot of behavioral data that we could use. So that was the first pillar to move away. The second pillar was the whole psychology element of it. What we were essentially not able to commercially prove that psychology itself, like using that psychological lens, can actually drive performance. We were able to use big data to drive performance, but we weren't getting the results, commercially viable results, that by kind of taking the data, understanding that you were an introvert or an extrovert or an open or conscientious person, and then tailoring communication, we were actually getting the results. We could take the data, we could make product recommendations, we can select target lists. That stuff was working. But actually the psychology part of it wasn't. And so the company kind of mutated or pivoted into a digital, essentially a kind of a creative company, a digital creative company where you could take a piece of creative. So let's say an ad on Facebook, and we could make recommendations for how to change that ad to make it perform better. So what pictures should you choose for different audiences? What text should you use to appeal to certain audiences? Without the psychology, just straight up, we would look at your previous data, your previous ads that you've run. We analyze through big data and what images, what elements within images worked and didn't work, and then use that to make recommendations and to improve your ads going forward. And that's eventually what the company was bought out for, is basically the models that could take images, and Shutterstock was one of the largest image holders on the planet. And they were interested in getting into this space rather than just holding the data and selling pictures. They wanted to actually integrate within Facebook and other platforms, so you'd use them more. And using our AI to basically power image recommendations and making search better for different audiences. That's effectively what the company ended up doing, and that's what we were bought for.
So essentially, like the YouTube algorithm recommending the next content that a viewer might like, but on their platform to say, well, if you've purchased this image, then you'll probably be interested in these images as well. So kind of like the upsell process, essentially. Is that what you're
Exactly. I
looking
mean,
for?
the simplest would be something like like you've run 1,000 ads. We've analyzed 1,000 ads. We've determined that pictures with cats in them perform better. Or maybe you want to go into more detail. Pictures with red cats
Right.
holding out paws perform better. We've ranked all of our pictures of cats with paws, and we believe this one is going to do 90% better. This one's going to do 70% better. This one's going to do 30% better. And in an ideal situation, you integrate it all together. So you even run an ad, maybe even from Shutterstock. They never quite got that far, but they were thinking of actually building a platform for running ads. So actually getting into more of the even ad running and kind of programming ads and building out a platform of their own. They always saw themselves as a Canva competitor, so they were looking for tools to allow creative people to basically build ads and use their images to do that.
Right. And so tell me about the acquisition, because that it's always an interesting encounter, I think, for founders, and always vastly different when I speak to people, their experience of it. Albeit because some founders can't say that much but for legal reasons, but equally it is always a very different story. So how did that come about? Were you and your co-founder at the time seeking out an exit at the time? Did it just happen? Did they approach you? Were they a customer of yours at the time? Like, how did it all sort of come together?
I think it's fascinating. If anyone ever has a chance to go through an acquisition, it's one of the most fascinating sides of capitalism I think you could ever have. And you're right that every story is different. And I've spoken to lots of founders as well since, even for the book, and it's always a fascinating path to the end. Ours, there's kind of two parts to it. So the first part was 2 years prior to 2021 when the actual acquisition happened. In 2019, we had launched a platform for people to upload their pictures, connect to their Facebook accounts. We would analyze it and then make recommendations. And we had one customer who said, I'm using Shutterstock. So right now I have to go to Shutterstock, buy a bunch of images, upload them onto your platform, and then you tell me that all the images I bought were bad, and I have to go and buy some more. And can you build an integration with Shutterstock so that I could see them before I buy? And we reached out. I remember this. I reached out to Shutterstock. First day, put me up with their sales team, who basically said, "Oh, great! You want to sell images, Shutterstock images, a resale agreement? Go ahead and sell them." And I said, "No. This is much bigger than just a sales, contract with you. Like, we could really add value. This customer of ours, but he's also of yours, and I'm sure there's hundreds of thousands of others who want this." And so eventually we were put in touch with their kind of corporate team. And the person who spearheaded this integration and facilitation was actually their head of corp dev. So the team that's usually responsible either for M&A or external partnerships, as in our case. And we started working, and we built an integration with them, and then this person just disappeared, and so it just never went anywhere. They stopped talking to us, but we had this integration with Shutterstock, and some people used it, and we actually were able to use their APIs to pull images, and it all worked. We scored, it was done. And that was it. And so for 2 years afterwards, we didn't hear from them. The integration lived. The platform kind of developed. And 2 years later, it was really out of the blue. I remember I was in Belarus at the time. It was a cold winter night, and I just get an email from a CTO at Shutterstock saying, "Hey, we want to chat." And when the CTO of a NASDAQ listed company comes to you, you chat. And so we get on the call, and there were maybe 10 of them there. And it was very senior people, and it was me and my CTO. And so they had like head of corp dev, CTO, CMO, head of data, like all these people. And I've been in NA conversations before. They didn't go anywhere with others. So right away, it's got a very particular. Those meetings have a very particular feel to them. It's almost like being to a proctologist. It becomes very intimate very quickly. And they just start asking very intimate, how much was your revenue last year? Oh, how does this algorithm work? Why did you pick this model and not this model?
They didn't give any indication that it was an M&A conversation beforehand. No. You just found out at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Within 5-7 minutes. I mean, realistically, right away, when you have 6 C-level people sitting there, they're not just looking to chat.
You can put 2 and 2 together. HR leaders, let's be real. Your company is sitting on a ticking time bomb of assumed competence. You've got great people, sure, but do you actually know what skills your team have? Not job titles, not CVs, actual capabilities. That's where Peer comes in. We run independent, human-led skill audits that turn gut feelings into real data. Who's excelling? Who needs development? Where are the gaps that could derail your next big strategy? With PeerAudits, you're not just managing people, you're future-proofing your entire workforce. Scan the QR code on screen or hit the link in the description to book a call with Peer and get 20% off your first skills audit. Because guessing isn't a strategy.
But you don't know. Yeah. And for me, I was playing very kind of aloof. I'm like, oh, well, hello, welcome to my little to Zoom. It was a Zoom call. It's COVID. So hello. And so we just started chatting and it became, very, very intimate. So they're asking all these questions and, in my mind, and I try to be very open because you hear all sorts of stories, and this was my first. So on one hand, there's always the danger of they're just trying to steal everything. They're just going to talk to you and then they will go. And so don't tell them anything. And I didn't really ever believe in that. I mean, if they wanted to, they could just do it. They don't really need to get on it. Like the hour that I'm going to give them, they're not going to learn a whole lot more. Maybe something a little bit like, oh, they should use this AI model, not this model. But, so I was quite open with them and my CTO. We just started answering their questions. And it was very clear that they were very familiar with the topic. So they were clearly already doing something in this, and they had clearly attempted to do things in this field before talking to us. So we talked, and we talked for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. They all said thank you, and we parted ways. And about 2 weeks later, I get a follow-up email from the head of Corp Dev saying, "Hey, can you jump on the call?" And at the time, we were fundraising, and we were kind of looking for. I guess it's sort of like a Series A+ type round. We had done a Series A. We need more money to continue. And so we were fundraising. And so I've been open that we were fundraising. So we get on the call, and then within kind of 5-10 minutes, he basically says, look, all options are on. We liked you. All options are on the table. We prefer to buy you. That was it. Our option is to buy you. And that was the first time the B word, the acquisition, the A word was said. And so I went back to our investors, to my co-founders, and there was interest from, I think, everybody's side. From our side, we were quite tired. This was 6 years on the dot when this was happening. So we were quite tired. It's not that we we were putting on a brave face saying that, we'll raise another round and do more work and it's going to be great. But it was quite tough. We were having a hard time getting product market fit. So from the founder side, there was interest. From the investor side also, there was interest. They were kind of split on whether to support us in another round or just give up. So there was interest from the investors. So Shutterstock really came at the right time. So then we went back and we did a couple of months of, I guess you call it due diligence, kind of them having quite a few meetings with us. We probably in total had maybe 10 meetings with their engineering staff, just trying to understand our technology and what it does and who's in the company. Eventually, they made an offer. We went back and forth on the term sheet, and then we signed that. And then we did a few more months of kind of very involved due diligence. They brought in external accountants, lawyers. We had to submit our code for review as well. And then eventually we closed the deal in July, I think. I think it was late July of 2021. So it took, all in all, it took about 6 months, which I've been told is a very standard kind of time frame. If things work well and they kind of go at the pace they should, it's going to be about 6 months from the first meeting to close.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard far longer as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it can be far worse than that. That's great, and very fortuitous that it seemed like it was really the right timing for the majority of you, at least from a founder perspective, investor perspective, and so on. How big was the team at that point?
We were about 20 people, roughly. I mean, okay. At our peak, we were probably about 30, and then COVID hit, so we downsized a little bit. So at that time, we were about 20, and by the time we closed, yeah, we were about that.
Yeah. And then, am I right in saying that you then worked for Shutterstock for a little bit? So was that part of the terms to then work for them for a short period of time following the acquisition?
Yeah, it was an interesting story. During the process, we kind of asked, because it was very clear that aside from the acquisition price, it was quite important. What was going to be important is what we were going to do next. And so, what are the titles? What is the salary? The options. What was that going to look like post acquisition? And so we raised that during the negotiations. And so they came back and they said, and this was me and their head of M&A talking. And they basically said, Igor, these are the jobs, and this is kind of what we envisioned for your team. And I was like, great. And then they said, as for you, we're not sure. I mean, they didn't say this, but they kind of said, we're not sure we need you. We already have a CEO. So we're not quite sure. And funnily enough,
you're not going to take his job anytime soon. Yeah.
No. And funnily enough, a week prior to this, I had spoken to their head of HR, and so she asked me, okay, the team, but what about you? What do you do? And I started listing all the things. I was the first software developer. I did the marketing. I did sales. I did fundraising. I managed the board, and kind of listed 30 things. And then I said to her, but you know what? Honestly, I feel like I'm a little bit unemployable. And it was only afterwards I thought, why would I say that to the head of HR? So I think they reached the same conclusion that this guy was just unemployable.
Yeah. But it's funny. It's so funny you say that, because I tell people that all the time myself. Like, I've been an entrepreneur now for a while, and I know a lot of people who feel the same way, that they've been either serial entrepreneurs or they've been a founder, for a while, first company, second company, whatever it is. And I think we all feel kind of the same way, that because our skill set is so varied, and we're just used to thinking the way that we do and working at the pace we do. I've told people time and time again, I think I'm probably unemployable, and I really hope that never comes up.
Well,
it's true. I mean, I think that's why you see so many founders go on and just found. Right, it came up. But I think that's why you see so many founders just go on and start a new company, because it's just like, well, this is what I do. We solve problems. It's like, I'm not going to be able to sit there and work for someone else and do a 9 to 5. It's like, can't think of anything worse. It's like,
I think it's the freedom, right? Once you taste it, it's like animal that gets released into the
Mm.
wild or whatever, and they taste it and their eyes widen, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" You just can't go back. You can't go back to the
Yeah,
pre-freedom
yeah.
days. Um, yeah.
But you
So
also just know that as an employee, I just know I would be an absolute pain in the ass because of like, I can just imagine like, okay, we need you to just sit down and concentrate on this thing for the next 12 months. I'd be like, no way.
yeah.
I'll be trying to pull it apart. I'll be trying to fix it. I'll be trying to make it more efficient. I'll be trying, you know what I mean? And employers don't need that. They just need people to get on and get the job done. And I'd be like, that's not me, man. Like,
Exactly. You'd be arguing. You'd be like, no, 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 this is not the job. You're assigning me the wrong task. I should be doing this instead. They don't need that.
yeah, exactly.
So when the deal came through and we closed, my job was basically, they said, look, do 6 months as a consultant. And then if you like us and we like you and there's a job for you and want to stay, then we can extend it. I remember being quite worried about it because they were also paying me quite a bit of money to be doing this. And I wanted to do a really good job. And there wasn't, I mean, the first couple of months, like the transition, handing things over, there's a lot to do there. But at a certain point, there wasn't much. And I was still running as a CEO, 150%. And I'm like, come on, there's nobody there. Everybody's chilling. But so it's really, I was like, oh man, what's going to happen? And I actually had flown to New York to their headquarters one day, and I met the CEO for like 5 minutes. This guy just walked by the office, and so I said hello, and we shook hands, and he says, yes, you're Igor. You're with us until end of December, right? And this was still like early November. And so at that point, I knew that somewhere in their budget, they had penciled me in until end of December. And sure enough, December 31st was my last day, and I never heard from them again. Yeah.
They bought your company, so you can't hold it against them too much, I suppose. But all in all, then I know that you probably can't say too much either way. But I would assume that you're relatively happy with the way things panned out and kind of the terms of the acquisition. I would assume, otherwise you wouldn't have agreed with it. I suppose.
No, it was honestly looking back at it. Because at the time you always want more and you're like, oh man, like we could have squeezed and all
Right.
that. But in retrospect, oh man, it was the best thing that ever happened. It was just at the right time. And what we didn't realize is just how tired we all were. I still talk to my co-founders
Right.
sometimes. And they were like, man, it was beyond burnt out. Like, it was really bad. And it probably took me, probably a year, probably even longer until I felt. I just remember wanting to sleep and eat and just not talk to anybody. And it probably was about 6 months before I felt like I wanted to call somebody. That just to catch up. And I hadn't had that feeling in years. So we were very burnt out. So it worked out really.
Was that just burnout, or was that to some extent maybe some sort of remorse for you're actually mourning the loss of your company, and there's maybe a certain amount of melancholy there as well?
Not in my case, because I remember I mean, because I was doing a PhD in
purely burnt
psychology
out.
and kind of read a lot of stuff and was interested in how people think very early on. And I make this recommendation to people all the time. I made a clear distinction between who I am and who the company is, and that we are two different beings. So I never let it kind of wrap up into who I am. In other words, I never identified, that whether or not I'm a good person by whether or not the company is doing well. And so when the company was gone, then, it's like, they took a bag or whatever. Like it wasn't me, that they didn't take a part of me. And so for me, I didn't feel like I was now missing a part of me. There were a couple of things that definitely changed that I thought, oh, wow, that's weird. Like, I didn't have access to the resources of having a business, right? So, if you need to take a flight somewhere, you always have a corporate account, and you have your budgets, and all of a sudden that's all gone. So there were a couple of things that were inconvenient. But other than that, I didn't really feel like I lost something. And so in that, and the 5 months, the 6 month transition period was actually quite good as well. It gave time to put things to rest. I met the team. We went out for a really nice dinner. I met with co-founders, and so there was time to kind of process the whole thing. But yeah, come January 1st, I was just free.
Yeah. No, I imagine that time would have been quite crucial for that, because had it just ended, one day you handing over, which I mean doesn't really happen in an M&A process really, but had it done that, then I guess that would have been a bit more of a shock to the system. Because I mean, I imagine no matter how much you would try and have that mindset of not tying your identity to your business, there's always going to be a slight part of that which is unavoidable. I mean, this is 6 years of your life, 6 years of friendships and relationships and hard work, but it's inevitable that some part of you is going to be tied up to it to a point. That I don't think that's really avoidable, but at least if you have that time to slowly hand over and to come to peace with it, then I suppose that definitely helps.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
I think it was also COVID that helped in a way, because everything just moved online, and so everything became less real in a way. It was all, Zoom calls from all over the world. So
right, a little bit more detached.
What it was also kind of very nebulous at that point. And, the whole deal was done online. I had never physically met any of these people until months into it. So that was also quite interesting. Okay. Yeah. So you couldn't even fly to New York at the time when the whole thing was going on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's interesting. And so then tell me what happened after that. So you said it was a good 6 months or so before you kind of really wanted to get back out into the world. So what did you start doing? And what were you doing in the meantime? Were you just sat at home playing video games, like eating ramen noodles?
What does 6 months look like? Yeah, so so during those 6 months, I continued to work. My job was partly to make sure the transition was done, and then partly to help inform Shutterstock's long-term strategy. So it was kind of looking for other companies for them to acquire or any other partnerships they should have. So I was doing that as much as as much time as that was taking up, and beyond that, I traveled. I basically realized as I was kind of thinking about this interview and introducing myself as a digital nomad. I've basically started to travel in 2020. And I hadn't stopped to this day. So it's been almost 5 years. And so during this whole time, I continued. So I was in London for a little bit. I spent summer in Europe. And then I went to Canada to see my parents. I went to New York to meet Shutterstock. Then I came back. So yeah, I just continued to travel, and kind of waited out the 6 months and made sure that the transition was done correctly. On January 1st, I was in Canada. So that's when the whole thing kind of officially ended for me. And my big dream was to go to the Maldives. So I booked a vacation to go to the Maldives. Why, I don't know. I just really wanted to go there. So I just booked the first vacation in a long time, and then I just went there. And then after, I ended up in Ukraine. Because I'm originally from Ukraine, so my family, my grandma lives there. So This was February of 2022. So I was actually in Ukraine when the war started. And I was in Kiev, and that kind of started the next chapter of my life. I took like the on the day that the war started, I took the train to go back to Lviv, which is the town I'm from, which is on the west of Ukraine. And then the next couple of days I spent volunteering and helping out. And then I ended up volunteering for the armed forces of Ukraine. And I did that for 4 or 5 months, more or less. And after that, I came back to Canada, and maybe 2 months after, I started working for my friend's company, which is kind of a different stage as well. So that's how it's not exactly the rest that I was expecting, but I basically that whole year 2022 was like a sabbatical for me, and I just spent half of it in Ukraine. And then after that back to Canada, and then eventually ended up in Portugal.
So that time when you were volunteering for the Ukrainian Armed Forces, then, like, were you thrown into sort of some whirlwind type training, or had you already done military training at another point in your life? Like, how does that work? Because I know very little about that.
Yeah, so at the time, the president of Ukraine. But this was about 3 days into when the war started. The president of Ukraine announced that any foreigners that wanted to fight or to kind of join the armed forces, they could do that through what they call the International Legion. And I basically applied. And very quickly they replied back, said sure, and I showed up, and I ended up being actually the second person to physically make it to the base, and so there wasn't anything yet even there, so it was just a military base. And I think they also very quickly realized that my skill set was more of an organizational nature rather than the fighting nature. And I hadn't done any military training before. And so I ended up helping them kind of set up the Legion, and from like logistics and some other things, fundraising and all that. More than fighting. And then eventually I kind of got a bit bored of that. So there was a good 2-3 months that I did that. And I said, look, I want to go on the front lines. I want to see what that's like. And so I ended up joining one of the teams, getting trained, and then we got deployed. And I did about 3 weeks on the front lines, all in all. And then I said, okay, that's it for me. And I left.
Fair enough. And yeah, well, so I mean, it just goes to show then you're not entirely unemployable. You're useful in the army, so that's good. That must have felt good to know that you could you could deploy those entrepreneurial skill sets.
It was the most bizarre thing, because I kept telling people that we were setting this thing from scratch, and I was telling people that, and every day something was going wrong, and there were problems, and sometimes a missile would hit our base. But regardless of all of that, I felt, and this was what I was honestly feeling, that this was easier than running my company. This was actually. And the way I said it, look, guys, we already have product market fit. So the rest of it is easy. We already have people coming.
I kind of know what you mean. Yeah, look, I think I know what you mean, because I think that might sound a bit strange for you to say because I've been very fortunate to have on my show quite a few ex-military founders, right? So people who have served in their military for their country and then later become founders. And it's actually something that they kind of say a lot of, which is in the military, it's a machine that's already designed to follow orders and to fall in line and to follow instructions. So it's a well-oiled machine that if you give it a set of instructions, it will go out and execute, and it will do those. And so it thrives on organization and that way of thinking. Very, very well. Whereas obviously a startup, it's like wrangling cats. It's like trying to be a cat herder. You're trying to implement organization and structure on something that, and a group of people that ultimately do not want to have structure, because you're trying to solve a problem at the same time, and you're trying to find, like you say, product market fit, and do all these things and basically move a mountain that doesn't want to be moved. So I kind of get what you're saying, that if you're going the other way around, which by the way, you're the first person that I've talked to, actually, I think, that has done the other way around, from entrepreneur to military, then it kind of would make sense that the inverse would also be true, that if you're so used to continuous roadblocks after roadblocks to try and implement a new structure, a new way of approaching something in the startup world, that if you go to the military, it's very welcoming of that. It's like, yeah, cool, we've got the resources, and they just get shit done, right? It's like, okay, this is the plan. As soon as it's agreed, it's executed, right? That would make sense. Yeah. So I kind of get what you're saying.
And for me,
obviously the stakes are a little bit higher, but I get what you're saying.
Well, and I found a couple of differences. I'm happy to talk about that as well. But one thing that I felt like is and I haven't done this, but it's like doing a startup in the corporate environment, where you're kind of given the funding. There's already an HR department, there's already a legal department, an accounting department, and you're just kind of doing your little piece, and no one really cares about your little piece, because there's a big thing going on, and maybe one day your little thing will bring some revenue to the bottom line, but we're already doing a million other things. So in that sense, it definitely felt like a lot easier to do. And there wasn't this I mean, there was a kind of an existential death issue, but there wasn't an existential well, if you fail, like the military collapses. You're such a tiny part of it that they just would continue without you.
Yeah, it would just move on to the next project, kind of thing. Yeah. That's interesting. That's an interesting comparison. I suppose that works. Yeah. So you then did a few weeks on the front line. So what was that like?
What was that like? That was people ask me, first of all, why I didn't have to go, and I could have stayed back for sure, and probably, to be fair to everybody, I would have been way more useful staying back. But it's interesting when you're in the military, or at least, and I think, again, I don't have military background, and the country was at war, so it's not like I would have joined at 36 years old. I would just go and join the military. So this was a very unique situation. But in that situation, once I've joined the army, there's definite feeling like your service is incomplete unless you go there. Kind of like, and I've had some people, like, because we were dealing with people from all over the world coming to fight for Ukraine. So we had a lot of career soldiers from all over the world. And sometimes when you ask them, why did you come here to this country that you've never been to fight in the war that has nothing to do with you? Some people would say, look, like, I've been training, I'm a professional soldier. I've been doing this for 10 years, right? Since I was 18, I'm 28 now. And for me, it's like you're training for the MMA match your whole life without actually ever stepping into the ring. And I want to prove myself. I want to go out there. I want to, test it. It's like doing an exam of sorts. So there are people like that. And when I was there, I didn't quite feel that I had to be tested, but it was, and I'm a lot of it, I'm driven by curiosity. I was very curious. And I wanted to see what I think, or what I thought was kind of the edge of humanity, what that looks like, right? Like that line between life and death. Because a lot of in our daily life, we don't really go that far, right? Like when you're driving, there's a 0.0001 chance that you're going to die. When you're on the front lines and they're shelling you, there is a 10% chance, right? So infinitely more, and you see death. And so what does that feel like? What does that look like? Who are the people there? How do they behave? I wanted to experience that. I wanted to see that. so I went, as I say, I'm pretty open about it. I only lasted about 3 weeks. I think I reached the point of fear, that basically everything inside of me was telling me that, like, my guardian angel was basically putting his hands up and saying, Igor, like, if you stay here, I'm out. Like, you're on your own. Whatever happens now, like, your insurance is void.
Yeah.
So
you were pretty convinced then at that point that if you stayed, that you probably wouldn't have come back.
I thought so. I don't know whether that's the case, obviously, but yeah,
of course.
So that's but so we were in terms of the tasks that we had to do, a lot of it was reconnaissance. My main job was really kind of interpreting between the foreigners and the Ukrainians. But I would go out on missions as well with them, and we were doing kind of sometimes even the more dangerous things than. Because we would go out kind of all the way to the front rather than kind of staying back and holding lines and things like that. So a lot of it was intelligence, reconnaissance, that type of work. And you kind of stay in the forest, hope that the drones don't get you, kind of go do whatever you have to do and come back. And you would do that. Usually the day would start early in the morning, like 4 a.m. you get up. So that you kind of deploy before the sun comes up. You do your thing and during the day, and then you come back. So that's roughly what it looked like at the time.
Yeah. Well, a huge amount of respect for you for finding the courage to do that. But I'm curious to ask you about how that experience kind of maybe changed your perception on things. But and I do want to ask you that, and I will ask you that, but I'm going to have to ask you that in part 2 because we've run out of time for part 1. So we'll get to that in part 2. So for those listening and watching, you're going to have to come back in a couple of days to check out part 2, where I'm going to continue speaking with Igor here about that and lots of other things, also about what you're working on now, and so on. So we'll get to that in part 2. So thanks for listening and watching, everyone, to part 1. That's the end of part 1.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Subscribe with notifications turned on to get notified when part 2 comes out. While you wait, please join in the conversation in the comments below.